Good morning, guys. My name is Joshna. So today I want to discuss about the APIs and what is the resource and how does resource is transferring between and what is the importance of this resource and etc. and so on. So let's start with the word API. S- So we know that our project is revolving around the concept of RESTful APIs, and as well as these microservices and these HTTP methods as well, right? So let's understand what is the exact meaning of this API. So API it is nothing but application programming interface. So this API allows different software applications to talk with each other. But how do we structure this communication? Do you have any idea how this communication happens? So there are uh, there are some standards while communicating through these APIs. Now I said that these APIs are used to communicate with different softwares. So now, what is the REST RESTful APIs? REST API it is nothing but it's a standard. It is a structure for using those APIs. So the key idea is to treat data as a resource. So this means that everything in your application is considered as a resource that can be accessed, modified, or deleted, etc. So let's take an example of the bookstore. So in that, a book would be a resource, and each book would be uniquely identify something like we can assign the ID, right? So let's say we have a book ID just like 101, etc. So when we want to interact with this book via API, we use that ID as a reference to access those data. Okay, so now let's understand what is the important and what is this resource and how does this resource is important as well. So in simple terms, a resource is anything that can be uniquely identified and has some data associated with it. So it may be a physical term like a book or something, and like an order in our project we have it create order as well in something. And let's say for example an employee. Okay, so employee is stored in a database. It could we consider it as a resource. So okay, so as this employee resource, so this employee may have its name, um, ID, but it is automatically incremented by the database as well. And these we have the email, and we have the phone number, and we have something like address, right? So these are the fields of this resource employee. So these fields are what make up the employee resource. So each resource should be uniquely identified by its own ID, right? So and this and based on this ID only, we can do our CRUD operations on it. So we very well know about this. What are CRUD operations, right? Um, So let me say that CRUD operations are nothing but, as the name suggests, CRUD. In this C means create, and R means read the data, and U means updating the data, and as well D means deleting the existing source or something. Okay, so every resource like an employee or order so can be created or read or updated or somehow deleted also. These are known as these CRUD operations. And so this which the backbone of how to interact with the data through some APIs. Okay. um, Now let's understand how we can use these create. So we said that create is used for creating an object and store it in our database, right? So how we can use this create and how we update, how we save the data to the database. So this operation basically allows us to create a new resource basically. So think of it like adding a new employee to the database, right? So for example, for these CRUD operations, we basically use nothing but the HTTP methods. Okay, these HTTP methods allow us to these CRUD operations. So let me say, what are those HTTP methods? We have several HTTP methods like post and post, update, delete, um, delete, and as well as get by ID basically. Okay. So when we use these post means when we are updating our data to the database, when we are saving our data, let's say saving our data to the database, that is where we use this post. Updating is, it is nothing but we already have some data in our database. So but now we need to change the data based on some situations or something. We need to somehow needs to change the data, right? So at that situation, we use the update. So what does this do means this updates change the already existing data. So for this, we need to give updated data to this to do this operation. Okay, and delete. Somehow we have the data in our database, right? So when we want to delete the data from the database, then we use this HTTP method delete. Okay, get by ID. So when we want to fetch the data from the database, right? Fetching the data from database. So basically how we fetch means by using this id. So we said that we use a resource to fetch and to do these CRUD operations, right? So id, which is one of the most important in these APIs as well as something else, let's say anything. So based on the id, these CRUD operations are happening. And this this getting accessing our data is happening by id only. Without this id, the rest API is nothing without this id. So we consider id as basically, I said that, a resource is one of the most important concept in the restful APIs or while developing the project also. Okay. um, Now let me tell you how this post method is used. Let me how this post method is used. um let me take an example. I'll show you the. So we know that we are developing our project in for the PayPal, right? By using PayPal, right? So PayPal is basically providing us this type of document to read and understand how we connect with the PayPal as well, and how the communication is happening between these APIs as well. And let's understand. I'm taking one of the API. Orders is just an API basically. So let's understand how this is happening. So here we are having like a post. So I said that it is a HTTP method to save the data to the database, right? So you are seeing these all, or this is basically called as an endpoint. So while we are writing our code, we use these endpoints to connect these our app with this browser as well. So I said that resource, and in resource we just have I said ID. But how we get those ID means here, though. So we send a request to the PayPal as well, and we get some response as well. Here we saw some response as well. So any API call in the REST APIs or microservices is just based on the request and response manner also. Just this. So how we send our request to that PayPal means, so we are sending these. So this is in header. So we are basically use these all in a postman. We put all these in a postman as a request, and we get a response in this postman as well. Okay, it's D means it's a data we are sending. Okay, so let's see how this is happening means. So we are sending our data in the form of JSON here. So what are the JSON means? It's a key value pairs. So it's a key, and this is a value. So when you see everything is just in a key value form only. So here when you observe these, it's a key purchase unit. It's nothing but a key, but in that key the object is an value. How? How amazing, right? So basically, value means we just consider as variable or something, you are right. But here, the object is considered as a value. That means we have these what is called nested things, right? Nested objects. Okay, in an object we have in another object. Let's say here it's the entire object. So we are sending our request in the form of JSON, and we are getting our response in the form of JSON only. Okay, here when you look, so this JSON is also in a nested loop as well. So when you carefully observe that, here we get an ID, right? But we didn't give any ID here in our request form. But how did we get this ID means? So when we are saving our data in the database to access that data when we want as well, and to uniquely identify that data, I said that resource. So to uniquely identify this data, so these PayPal return are giving us an ID. This is an unique ID. So all IDs are not equal. For every request, for every post method, we just get the different ID. So this ID is used in the entire project while we want to get this data. And there are several options to use this data as well. Okay, let's come to our thing. So now you understand how the resource we are sending and how we get data as well, right? Create is can be created by using the method post method. I said that we are using this for saving our data as well. Uh, let's understand how we basically write it on our project. So let's say we have sorry let's say we have method called as an save method. Okay, um, in this save method it is nothing but we just have some of the logic or something to store these data in a database. Basically it is not a complete logic, but basically here I'm taking this as a controller. Sorry, let me tell you. um, I'm creating here one controller class. Let's say we are just creating one controller class. So in this controller class, let's say it's a controller class. In this controller class, we are having a method to say it's an public anything, public class. Let's say my controller to it. Okay, I'm creating in a class which is named as a my controller. And how would you say it is a controller? So how can you say that means we are having some of the annotations in this REST API. So by mentioning annotation REST controller, this class becomes an controller, REST controller. So how you map these means, um, we called another concept called request mapping annotation. So by using this request mapping annotation slash something API, okay. So by using this request mapping annotation, we map our HTTP request, our this method with the HTTP browsers as well. Okay, I said we have this method, and how to say this method is used for the save purpose. So I just said post, right? So we have an annotation, another annotation for saving the data, which is nothing but post mapping. Okay, this is how we save the data. We create a REST controller and we store data in our database. So this save method, again here it again calls the service layer, and the service layer again calls the DAO layer. Okay, this is how the save method, it calls the save method in my controller and it saves the data in the database. Okay, uh, let me tell you what is the MVC structure. I said that we are using the MVC structure here. What does the MVC structure means? It's a nothing but model view controller. Okay, in the RESTful APIs, we just use the model view controller. View means it's related to the front end. Basically how the flow happens means, so we get a request from the view. It's anything, it's maybe a e-commerce client as well. So these view, so the from this call goes to controller. So what controller does means, from these a controller just verifies and writes some code, just verifies is this a good call or not. So it calls the service method to, because this controller doesn't have any data, right? So if there is any communication needs to happen, so it calls the service layer. So in this service layer we write some business logic, and this service layer only can communicate with the DAO layer, and the DAO layer is directly communicate with the database, and it retrieves the data from the database and it gives again to the service layer. Here the DAO layer involves, here the DAO layer involves it indirectly or directly communicate with the database. So how these flow happens means, when any request coming from the front end, it first come to the controller. Controller validates that call, and it's if there is any logics or database connections needs to happen, then it sends this request to the service layer, and the service layer next sends to the DAO layer and as well as to the database. So now the data from the database is retrieved to the DAO layer, and it comes to the service layer, and then it gives to the controller layer. So in this logic, I'm just I read those a single line, but in this line we may call, just let's say we may call, uh, just imagine we have an service layer. That service layer name is service. Okay, so how we call means service a dot, let's call the save method in service layer. So here, how we are using this method means, here we are using the service layer object in our class. So how we are using these means, in class, so in class we can create, the my service object in our class. Let's say private, because we need some security concerns, so that's why we all always use these objects as a, right? Let's imagine we have a service class. So we are using the service class object in our class. If you want to use these in a way, in a such way, and how you are getting this means, mm. So here I'm just mentioning one annotation here, just like as an auto wiring, and I'm just declaring the object, my services object here, and this linking may happens, and this call goes to the service layer and service layer to DAO, and this all drama happens. So how this happening? We are not creating any object here. How does this service layer using these service layer using the service layer object means, there is a concept of there is a concept of auto wiring. So what does auto wire do means, it connects, basically it is the concept of dependency injection. So in RESTful APIs, we need not to create any object. So these object is created by this database by using the concept of dependency injection. Okay, so we are using the object, and what a magic, right? We are not creating any object, and we are using that object, and we are getting the data as well. So how this happens means, the Spring Boot is providing us one of the beautiful concept called as a dependency injection. And why it is providing means, because while creating an objects and while creating connections to the database as well, so here lots of burden is happening to the developer, as well as a lot of confusion happens, and basically the developers is messing up with this creating objects and using those objects, and creating the databases as well, and making then connections to the database as well, and there are not closing the database properly. Then there is a logs happens, and someone and so many people can't use this data as well. So there are a lot of problems for creating those objects for us. So by understanding these concept, providing Spring Boot providing a concept called as the dependency injection. It is a feature that is given by the it is a feature that is given by the Spring Boot. So what is auto wiring means, the wiring those objects. So wiring those objects, it is nothing but wiring the objects. So connecting one class to the another class. Okay, and so this auto binding happens in two ways, by using the dependency injection as well as the dependency lookup as well. So dependency injection means it automatically creating objects for us. Basically it happens on automatically. But what is dependency lookup means? So we need to ask the Spring that we need those objects to use in our system. We need to explicitly ask the Spring. Okay, so why we go through these dependency lookup while we have the dependency injection means there are a lot of situations may happen that you can use either that based on your interest you can use anything. Okay, and what does our next point means? So let's understand how this dependency happening in the Spring Boot. So how does the Spring Boot is providing this concept for us? So in Spring Boot we have a concept called Spring Container. In previous we create this Spring Container by using, I think, Bean Factory or something. Bean Factory. By using this interface we can create the Spring Container, as well as I think the application context something. I forget the name a little bit. Application context I might think there. So by using these interfaces we can create the Spring Container. Okay, in that Spring Container we may have our objects. We can say that create objects for our classes as well. Spring Container creates life cycle on of so it's nothing but it handles life cycle on of object for us. Okay, what is this life cycle means? So creating, using, and as well as so there is some garbage collection also for this, right? So this entire process, life cycle of the entire object can be handled, maintained by the Spring Container. Okay, so how it can done means, so we need to explicitly mention that please create one object for me for my class. And how we are saying, so in this example if you see the annotation auto wiring, so this is saying that to the Spring Container, it is the alert to the Spring Container that create an object for my class. Okay, so this is automatically happening by the dependency injection concept. It is auto wiring nothing but a dependency injection. Okay, so another way to said means, so in Spring Container our classes are basically considered as a beans. Okay, so we didn't say our project have different classes, so we have to this is nothing but a terminology for the Spring Container as well. So we considered our classes as a beans in the Spring Container. Okay, so to set the Spring Container that we need that object means, by explicitly saying or by mentioning another annotation which is called component. Okay, if you mention component under the class name, let's say if you have a class called public class container example, let's say. Okay, let's say we have a class name called container example, and if you're mention these, so if you're mention this at the rate of component, so above the class, So it is the alert, it is the nothing but call to the Spring container that, hey, Spring container, please provide me one of the object for this class. And the Spring container definitely responses and create objects for us. So there is some problem occurs if we have a if it is a simple project that say we have 2 3 classes, it's enough and it's cool. But what if our project has hundreds of classes? Then are you creating beans for the hundreds of classes? But no, it is not possible, and as well as it is somehow difficult, right? So at that point, what do you do means you so you need to explicitly say specify and specify for what classes you need these objects as well. Okay. So by mentioning this at the component at the entire classes are a concept of auto wiring, you explicitly or you implicitly say this to the Spring container, it understand that and it will create the objects for the only that you mentioned or at the component at the rate auto wide. Okay. Okay, let's come to the concept of these CRUD operations. Okay. I said that we have create, read, write, and as well. Okay, so this create is used by using the concept of post, and read, how the reading is happened from the database means by using the get. Okay. By using get, or here we using post mapping, right? In the same way we can use the at the rate get mapping here. We need to give some of the id. I would say example. Okay, control C, enter, control V. Just try to understand these points. Okay. Get. So if you're using this get here, then you're saying that I need to retrieve, I call retrieve. Okay. So getting the data means you are getting the data from the database based on some of the id. For these get mapping you need to give id. So this id, we know that this id it is nothing but resource as well. Okay. So for this, so this is nothing but um, I think these are the path variables as well. Okay. So let's understand what are those. Let's understand annotations as well. Okay. We have annotation called rest controller. Annotations, and we have rest controller annotation. So before we so basically when you return anything something, so this rest this Spring basically searches for the standard index.html file, standard static files as well. But to overcome that concept, we are using the rest controller. So this rest controller, it is the combination of both controller and plus response body as well. This rest controller contains the features of both controller as well as the rest response body as well. Okay. Auto wide. I said that this concept is used for the wiring the wiring the objects dynamically, basically. Okay. And next, let's say what are the annotations we have. Post mapping, we used that as well. post mapping, and we have a get mapping, and we have the update mapping, and we have the delete mapping as well. And what are these another another means? So basically the main Spring application contains the at the rate components can, and at the rate enable auto configurations, as I think, uh, enable auto configurations, I think. So these are the components and there is one another annotation as well that already the Spring main application contains as well in this, and remaining uh, annotations. So I think I remember these annotations only. So what I said means the Spring Boot uses something called a Spring container to manage objects, also known as the Spring beans, right? So the container controls the life cycle of these beans as well, and their creation, dependency, injection. Okay, so let's say an example like if one object needs to use another objects. So basically this happens, right? So Spring automatically handles those dependency injection as well. Okay, let's and we have another concept like postman. So for the testing purposes as well, and for the seeing the responses as well, we use this postman. And so for finally to wrap up the things, we have covered the essential I think API standards and REST APIs and CRUD operations, how what are the HTTP methods, and how Spring Boot makes it is easy to build RESTful APIs using annotations as well. So tools like Postman, so I didn't cover it here, but we know that for the testing purposes as well, where you need or when you're when you want to see the response as well, you can use this Postman as well, and help us to test this is help us to test these APIs. So while Spring layered architecture ensures a scalability and maintainability. So so by these test standards or writing, so it allows us to write a clean business logic. We can develop APIs that are powerful, and this REST API it is very easy to use. And so we know that this is a Spring Boot is so it is written uh, upon this Spring framework, right? So it contains the features based on both REST APIs, both the Spring Boot as well as it contains the Spring features as well. So and the Spring Boot providing the auto configurations, and it also providing the inbuilt Tomcat server as well. It has a lot of it contains a lot of inbuilt features as well. So it it provides the easy web development environment to us by using the Spring Boot. So I think I think this is end for this discussion, and thank you for giving this opportunity. Thank you all.